The moment the HOA told me no, they said it with that kind of calm, polished confidence that almost makes you doubt yourself. You know the tone. The kind that says, "We've already decided you don't matter here." And standing there in my own driveway with that letter in my hand, staring at my backyard like it had suddenly turned into a courtroom where the verdict had already been read, I felt something inside me click. Not anger exactly, not even frustration. More like clarity. The letter was simple. Fence request denied. Reason: incompatible with the heritage vision of Maple Crossing. Maple Crossing. Now that name sounds charming, doesn't it? Like some cozy little town you'd see in a Christmas movie, snow drifting across a gazebo while someone drinks hot cocoa. In reality, it's a regular suburban development outside Raleigh, North Carolina. Beige houses. Identical shutters. Amazon trucks rolling through every afternoon like clockwork. But the HOA here, they acted like we were protecting some sacred historical landmark. And all I wanted was a fence. Nothing dramatic. No castle walls, no electric wires, no medieval drawbridge. Just a normal white fence. The kind you see in family movies where the camera pans across a yard and the audience instantly knows. Yeah, these are regular people. The reason was simple. I have a dog. His name's Biscuit, rescue mutt, maybe 20 pounds soaking wet, but somehow convinced he's the mayor of the neighborhood. Biscuit has two hobbies in life: barking at squirrels and attempting to sprint directly into traffic anytime one of those squirrels gives him the wrong look. I also have a 6-year-old who finds it hysterical to leave gates open, and a neighbor who grows hydrangeas like they're priceless heirlooms. So yeah, fence seemed like a reasonable solution. I did everything the HOA tells you to do. Filled out their request form, attached neat little drawings, paid the administrative processing fee, which in HOA language basically means thank you for giving us money to tell you no. Then I waited. 2 weeks later, denial. And the second I read it, I already knew whose fingerprints were on it. Celeste Hawthorne. She was the HOA president, and if you've ever met someone who carries authority like it's part of their wardrobe, you'll understand Celeste immediately. Perfectly pressed blouse, pearl earrings, sunglasses even when it was cloudy. The kind of smile customer service reps use when they're politely telling you they will absolutely not help you. Her eyes never smiled though. Her eyes looked like a locked door. I'd had small run-ins with her before. Nothing major, just those little HOA paper cuts that slowly bleed you dry. One warning email because my trash can was visible from the street for 2 hours after pickup. Another notice because my porch light was excessively bright. And my personal favorite, a complaint because my kid drew chalk hearts on the driveway, and it created, I swear this is the phrase they used, visual clutter. Visual clutter. Imagine being so bored you feel threatened by sidewalk chalk. But I never fought it. I'm a quiet guy. Always have been. Teachers used to call me easygoing, which is just a polite way of saying he won't make trouble. So most of my life I just went along. Paid my bills. Kept my head down. That strategy works pretty well, until you run into someone who mistakes quiet for weak. And HOAs, well, they're practically designed to reward that mistake. So when I got that denial letter, I decided to do something unusual for me. I showed up to the HOA meeting. Now the Maple Crossing clubhouse is hilarious. The whole place looks like it was designed by someone who Googled generic community center, but they decorated it like a museum. Framed sepia photos of barns. Antique lanterns that definitely came from Home Goods. And this giant banner hanging over the room that says, "Preserving our past, protecting our future." I sat down in a folding chair holding my paperwork like I was about to defend a thesis. Celeste sat behind the board table like she was the mayor of a small country. She tapped her pen against my application, sighed dramatically, and said, "Mr. Nolan, your fence design is not consistent with Maple Crossing's character." I blinked. "It's a fence." She smiled politely. "A modern fence." I gestured toward the window. "Half the neighborhood has fences." She tilted her head slightly. "Those were installed before the current standards." Translation: we changed the rules after they built theirs. I tried again. "It's for my dog. He runs." Celeste leaned forward and said softly, like she was explaining something to a toddler, "Then perhaps you should supervise your pet more responsibly." And that was the moment something shifted. Not the words. The tone. The assumption that I was irresponsible. The idea that asking for a fence was some kind of inconvenience to her carefully curated vision of suburban perfection. I looked around the room. The other board members were avoiding eye contact. One guy nodded along like a dashboard bobblehead. An older woman in the back clutched a binder like it was scripture. And suddenly I realized something. This wasn't about fences. This was about control. So I stood up, smiled politely, and said, "All right, no fence." Celeste nodded with visible satisfaction. "Wonderful. Next item." She thought that was the end of it. It wasn't even the beginning. That night I walked my yard with Biscuit on a leash, staring at the property line like it was a chessboard. Then I opened the HOA bylaws. And I read them. Not skimmed, read them. Highlighter, sticky notes, coffee, the kind of obsessive focus you get when you're assembling furniture and the instructions stop making sense. About halfway through I found it. A clause buried under landscaping rules that said, perimeter structures must reflect the neighborhood's heritage character through appropriate materials and design. It specifically banned prefabricated contemporary fencing. But you know what word it never used? Wall. It never said stone. Never said masonry. Just heritage character. And you know what material screams heritage? Stone. And you know what definitely isn't prefabricated? A wall built one rock at a time. Right then I stopped feeling angry. Instead I started feeling creative. Because if Celeste wanted heritage, I was about to give her heritage. The next morning I called a local mason named Hank. Big guy, sunburned neck, hands like tree stumps. I said, "I want a stone boundary." He asked, "Like a garden wall?" I said, "Not exactly." I sent him photos, Scottish ruins, colonial stone fences, old coastal forts. Walls that looked like they'd been standing there since before the country existed. Hank studied them and laughed. "Buddy, who are you mad at?" I said, "The HOA." He laughed even harder. "Say no more." We did everything legally. Surveyed the property line. Pulled permits. Filed paperwork. I wasn't building a crime scene. I was building a loophole. The first truckload of stones arrived on a Tuesday morning. Huge slabs. The kind you don't usually see in a suburban cul-de-sac. Biscuit barked like the rocks were invading. My kid ran outside holding a juice box and asked, "Are we building a castle?" I said, "Something like that." The foundation went in. Then the wall started rising. At first the neighbors watched with curiosity. Then confusion. Then concern. Finally that uniquely suburban emotion where people believe they deserve an explanation for your life choices. "Is that allowed?" someone asked. I smiled. "It's heritage." A week later Celeste noticed. She sent an email first. Subject line, "Unapproved construction notice." All caps, naturally. I replied with one sentence. "All permits are filed and the structure complies with Section 8.4 regarding heritage materials." 10 minutes later her car pulled into my driveway. She stepped out like she was arriving for a courtroom drama. Heels clicking. Jaw tight. Sunglasses on even though the sun was setting. She stared at the half-built wall. "What is this?" she demanded. "A boundary wall," I said. "This is not approved. It doesn't require fence approval. It's not a fence. It's acting like a fence." I shrugged. "It's acting like a wall." She leaned closer. "You're doing this to embarrass the board." "No," I said calmly. "I'm doing it because my dog needs to stay safe, and because you told me my fence wasn't good enough for your vision." Her lips tightened. "Maple Crossing has standards." "So do I." She stood there calculating. If she exploded, she'd look irrational. If she backed down, she'd lose control. So she chose the classic HOA response. "We will be discussing this." I nodded. Looking forward to it. The wall kept growing. Corner pillars. Arched entry gap. Wooden gate. Nothing aggressive, just solid. Old-looking. Permanent. And then Celeste escalated. First came the safety complaints. City inspector came, checked the permits, shrugged, left. Then drainage complaints. Another inspector, same result. Then the protests. A few of her loyalists stood on the corner holding printed signs. "Keep Maple Crossing open. Stop the fortress." Fortress. That's when I knew I'd already won. Because the wall had a nickname. My favorite moment came from my neighbor Frank, retired Navy guy who rarely says more than 5 words. He looked at the wall for a long moment and muttered, "This is the funniest thing I've seen in 10 years. Hank's crew finished the last stone on a Friday afternoon. It slid perfectly into place like the period at the end of a sentence. And standing there looking at it, I realized something strange. For the first time since moving here, I felt respected. Not by the HOA. By myself. The emergency HOA meeting the next week was packed. Celeste opened with a speech about community harmony. But her voice trembled slightly. This structure is hostile, she said, pointing at me. It disrupts the spirit of Maple Crossing. I held up the bylaws and said calmly, rules aren't vibes. They're words. Someone tried arguing intent. I repeated it. Words. Celeste snapped. You're weaponizing the bylaws. No, I said. I'm using them the same way you do. The room went quiet, because everyone there had their own story, their own warning letter, their own moment of HOA humiliation. The vote happened. The board quietly decided to table the issue. Translation, they couldn't stop it. A few weeks later, Celeste moved away. No announcement. No goodbye. Just a moving truck and gone. Rumor said she bought a house in a neighborhood with no HOA. Yeah, that happened. Now Biscuit runs freely in the yard. Kids ride bikes past the wall. Delivery drivers joke about the castle. And sometimes I stand there looking at those stones wondering something. Did I actually make things better? Or did I just win one battle in a system that still exists? Because it's easy to celebrate when the villain leaves. But what if the real villain is the idea that strangers get to decide what acceptable looks like? So now I've got a question for you. Was I wrong? Was I petty? Was I a hero? Or just another guy stirring chaos in a neighborhood that wanted peace? If you've ever dealt with an HOA or a boss or anyone who used rules like a weapon, what would you have done? Tell me in the comments. And be honest, because somewhere out there, a lot of quiet people are watching this thinking about the day they finally stop apologizing for taking up space.